Alright, we are back with a new video, and today we are once again updating the Big Brother 24 power rankings, this time during the Final 5 round. And obviously at this point the game is starting to wind down. We just had a pretty crazy double eviction, all things considered, and at this point it feels like the plans for this week are pretty solidified, so hopefully these rankings will be pretty straightforward. But as usual, there are 5 players left in the game to talk about, and let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 7, we have the first boot from the double eviction, and here we have Terrence. And this wasn't too surprising. I mean, he was the intended target during Michael's HOH, and nothing really changed to really alter that. And on the whole, I feel like Terrence played not that great of a game at the end of the day, where I never really got the sense he was that strong of a contender to win the game. Mind you, I felt like there was a decent shot he could make a deep run nonetheless, not so much because he was a big player, but because people saw value in him, people saw him as a potential number, or I guess as someone to drag to the end. But the fact that Terrence was taken out here by Michael of all people, someone who probably should have been trying to win out from this point and go up against the people that should be easier to beat in competitions, the fact that he takes out Terrence over a Monty or a Turner, I think speaks pretty poorly of Terrence's social game, to where Terrence was unable to convince Michael to do what was in his best interest, to go up against a Terrence. Now, it's not as if Terrence was the worst competitor left in the game. I mean, he had obviously won the HOH. Mind you, he came in second in it. He obviously came in second during the veto comp that he threw during the week where he wanted to backdoor Monty. And he obviously won the veto in the week that he won HOH. So it's not as if Terrence didn't have any comp wins. But compared to Monty and Turner, I feel like Terrence would have been so much easier for Michael to beat in competitions in the endgame, especially ones that were a bit more physical. But the fact that Terrence wasn't able to get Michael to keep him around, again, is not great for his game. And on the whole, I feel like Terrence played a pretty mediocre game. So because of that, he is here at number 7. Now we're moving on to number 6, and we have the other boot from the double eviction. And here we have Michael here. And this is a little embarrassing, as I did put him at number 1 at my last power ranking. Now, to be fair, I did say in that video that I figured there was a possibility that a flip could have happened during the double, as obviously doubles lead the way for like people to make rash decisions. People have the opportunity to take someone out without having the whole week to deal with the repercussions of making that move. But to be fair as well, I feel like up until the day of the double, I feel like there was a very strong chance that the gentleman's agreement was going to be upheld. And it was only after I made that video that Brittany's game was kind of exposed here. People figured out that Brittany was basically telling everyone that she was making Final 2 deals with them. And through that, a lot of the work that she did to protect both herself and Michael was undone since then. So obviously it was a mixture of things changing, but obviously the double getting into Monty and Turner's heads to where the flip did happen. And even then, we also saw during the veto that there is some questionable stuff over that competition where supposedly Michael's rope broke during it, which made it harder for him to win. So there were still a number of weird circumstances that led to Michael losing the veto there and obviously the flip happening. But I'll still take responsibility for my pick in that I was wrong about Michael winning out. And it was a pretty big risk for me to assume that he would win out from that point. But if we're looking at his game more generally, he did play a pretty good game, all things considered. Now, where I do take fault with him is during his final HOH, where he did decide to target Terrence over Monty and Turner, where I kind of understand why he was doing it, and that he felt like he was doing proper jury management by assuming that the jury would make a big deal if he had taken out Monty or Turner right after making this whole plea about how Kyle was targeting them and how he didn't want to punish Turner for doing the right thing by targeting Kyle during his HOH. But I still feel like Michael should have taken the move there nonetheless, especially with the context that he was going to win out. And I feel like by the end of it, he probably put a bit too much faith in the idea of the gentleman's agreement. He probably took his foot off the gas here, where he kind of just assumed and kind of hoped that Monty and Turner would stay true to their agreement long enough for him to win that final 5 HOH, survive the double, and again, potentially win out from this point. but I do fault him nonetheless for taking the wrong decision there, even if I do understand the reasoning for it. And then we have his gameplay during the double, where I do kind of find it entertaining seeing him scrambling during the double and just seeing how much he fought to the very end to try to get people to not turn on him, even going as far as to say that Turner is going against the LGBT community for voting him out as someone who's bisexual, which was a bit questionable, but it shows how much Michael's willing to fight there. We obviously have his nomination speech where he really threw Brittany under the bus, and just seeing how emotional Brittany got, hearing Michael betray her at every opportunity was also a pretty notable moment as well. And then obviously none of this was going to work. He was evicted. He stormed out of the house, but he did quickly turn it back on. It made me feel like he was just putting on a show for good TV more than him actually being upset at everything. But it was still very interesting seeing him play across the season, not just in the double, but obviously with him dominating the competitions. He obviously broke the veto record. He tied Janelle's single season comp record, which I do feel like speaks to how much of a superfan he was. He really studied the comps and all the strategies so that he could dominate a lot of these competitions, to the point where the only competitions he genuinely lost were the first HOH where he just dropped off. There was that HOH that basically involved random chance to get into it, but obviously he just didn't get into it. And then obviously that final veto, where even then there was still some questions over obviously the rope breaking, for instance. So on the whole, Michael is definitely one of the more entertaining presences on the season, one of the bigger players, but I understand why he was taken out when he was, so because of that, he is here at number 6. And with that, there are 5 players left in the game to talk about, and as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely it is that they'll win the game from this point. But at number 5, we have the player who is the most likely to be evicted on Thursday night, and here we have Alyssa, who is obviously the target coming into this week. And on the whole, I feel like Alyssa played an okay game. I wouldn't say it's a great game by any means, where obviously she was the key reason why the leftovers was formed in the first place. She was the one to tell Kyle about Old School, which then caused Kyle to go to Turner and to Monty and build the leftovers, which ultimately left her out of the power structure moving forward, to the point where her only in was through Kyle at that point. And it's obviously not great, but I do feel like she gets a bit underestimated by certain people, where I get that people get the sense that she probably doesn't win a jury vote in a lot of scenarios, but as I talked about in my jury scenarios video the other day, I felt like there were definitely cases where she could have won, particularly through the votes of like in India, Jasmine. I feel like Kyle votes for her in a number of situations as well. So I don't think Alyssa is necessarily someone who can't win the game, but obviously she was going to be targeted this week. And considering the fact that she had never won any competitions across the season, I do knock that against her nonetheless. And with her going out this week, I do have to leave her here at number 5. Now we're moving on to number 4, and we have a person who has largely been on the bottom across these power rankings, and they are still here. But here we have Brittany. And again, at this point, I don't see how she wins the game. I literally talked about this in my jury scenarios video. She doesn't win the game really in any scenario, really against anyone. But even then, like, she was put up on the block this week, and had the nom stayed the same, there was definitely a chance that she could have been targeted there. But obviously she won the veto, and we had that conversation with her and Monty, where Monty basically told her that he no longer trusts her, and he no longer really wants to work with her in the game, which, considering her spot, like that she is this GOAT at this point, I mean, that's not a great sign either. And obviously she's now in a pretty bad spot. Now, to be fair, I do think there are some outs for her. I feel like she can win some competitions to get herself towards the end of the game. I also feel like Taylor is someone who is a bit more amenable to working with her at this point. I think Taylor recognizes the fact that Monty and Turner are the biggest comp threats left, and if she were to get into power, I feel like Taylor would be willing to work with Brittany to take out one of those two in the final 4. So there are definitely ways for Brittany to get forward in the game, but the issue is that she's not winning at this point. So I can't have her any higher than here, so I have her here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and from this point on, this list is pretty straightforward, as these are basically the top people from last week's rankings, outside Michael. But at number 3, we do have Turner here. Now, I will admit that Turner definitely has more outs this week compared to someone we'll be talking about soon, in that he's obviously eligible to compete in Final 4 HOH, so there's that. And obviously, even if he doesn't win that, he can obviously secure safety through the veto. But with that said, I feel like Turner's probably in quite a bit of danger here, where if he doesn't win HOH, he basically has to win that Final Four veto in order to stay in the game, as I feel like both Brittany and Taylor would be willing to take that shot otherwise. And obviously, there's Monty as well, who could keep him safe if he were to win the veto there. But I feel like Turner's probably in not the best spot coming into the Final Four here. And even outside that, as I talked about in my last video, I don't think he's one of the more likely jury threats on the board. I feel like he would lose if he were to get to his ideal final two of him and Monty. And even outside that, I mean, his best case scenario against Brittany is one that he's not really going for at this point. So on the whole, I feel like Turner is someone who I don't have that much confidence in winning compared to the top two people, both in terms of his jury perception, but even in his path towards the end. Now, granted, I do have quite a bit of confidence in Turner to win one of those two competitions at the Final Four, but it's his lack of win equity at the very end that leads me to put him here at number 3. Now we're moving on to number 2, and we have someone who probably is one of the safer people coming into this Final Four, although even then, they're not entirely safe. But here we have Taylor here, and obviously Taylor is seemingly in a good spot heading into the Final Four. Now, it's not as if she's 100% safe. I could definitely see scenarios where she does go home, like if Turner wins the veto and decides like it's better to take Brittany towards the end. I could see the same thing if Monty were to be in that spot and if Brittany were to somehow repair her relationship with him. But I feel like Taylor's certainly one of the safer people of the people who I think have a genuine shot of winning the game at the end. And plus, even though I feel like she's probably one of the worst competitors in competitions, I think there's still a possibility of her winning like the Final Four HOH or a veto in that spot. And I do feel like if she were to get to the end against anyone other than Monty, I think she probably wins at this point. So I still feel like Taylor has quite a bit of win equity heading into this Final Four. And compared to a lot of other people, I feel like she is one of the safer people in that situation. But even so, it's not as if she's 100% locked for Final 3. And even then, she's not the biggest competitor on the board. So because of that, I do have her here at number 2. And now at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win Big Brother 24 right now is Monty. And it's a bit weird to have Monty here, as I don't feel like he's the safest person of the people heading into this Final Four. I do feel like there is at least one scenario where he goes home here, where if Brittany were to win the veto at Final Four, I feel like that opens up the door for him to be taken out there. And I don't think Monty particularly helped himself by basically telling Brittany to her face that he no longer trusts her. But even then, I do feel like there's a world where he could repair that relationship. I mean, he does technically have time. There's also the fact that he's not competing in the Final Four HOH, but honestly, I don't think that matters too much, as, I mean, veto is everything at the Final Four. And he also has Turner on his side, who I do feel like would take him to the Final 3 if he were to win that veto there. So I think Monty definitely has a shot to get his safety there. And even Taylor, who has been talking in recent days about working with Brittany, I do think there's still a chance Monty could still secure her loyalty as well. So there's definitely ways in which Monty can get through this round, even without winning competitions. But if we also factor in his overall competitive ability, along with his close alliance with Turner here, I do feel like Monty is in a good spot to get to the Final 3. And if he is in the Final 3 against Turner and Taylor, I feel like he's basically won the game at this point, as both of them seem more willing to take him to the end over each other. And I think Monty himself has quite a bit of potential to win that Final HOH anyway. I feel like at the end of the day, Monty is someone who, based on his competitive ability, is someone I have quite a bit of confidence in winning out from this point. And I know that I got clowned a bit for saying the same thing about Michael last week, only to be completely wrong there. But obviously, we're now heading to the Final Four. It's a much more manageable situation than what we had last week with Michael. And I do feel like Monty has more outs than a Michael to secure safety, even without competitions. So I feel like through all that, Monty seems like a pretty likely winner for me, and a big reason that he's here at number 1. And there we go, that will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, it really helps out with the channel. Now, I might make one more installment of this next week during the Final Four, but we'll have to see there. But even aside from that, we'll be making a review after the season ends along with a player ranking, so stay tuned for that. Survivor 43 is about to start up, so expect content for that, as well as the Amazing Race 34. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, and if you haven't already, be sure to join my Discord server. I'll leave a link to join in the description. As I said, a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.